welcome. This is the lecture on the administration of Thomas Jefferson and what's often called the Revolution of 1800, which is where the AP people have decided we were going to have a transition from period 3, which is all about the revolution and drafting of the Constitution and sort of defining the role of the national government under George Washington and John Adams. And they've chosen, the transition of power from the Federalist Party to Thomas Jefferson's party, the Republican Party, and known as the Revolution of 1800, this transfer of power. Now, Thomas Jefferson was deridingly called the Negro president. The 3/5 clause of the Constitution was a big boost to him. And the 12 electoral college votes that New York was able to bring in under Thomas Jefferson's vice presidential partner, Aaron Burr. And this led to a constitutional crisis. A big sort of glitch. When they wrote the Constitution, they said, okay, whoever comes in first will be president, whoever comes in second will be vice president, but they didn't consider that parties would form and that each party would put forward a presidential nominee and a vice presidential nominee. And so when the votes were tallied, Jefferson and Burr had equal number of votes, because all the people, when they went to vote, they said, okay, who's your first choice and then who's your second choice, and they were the one and the same. And so we had a sort of a controversy of between Jefferson and Burr. They're tied who gets to become president, and it went under Congress, and they finally, after many deliberations, went with Thomas Jefferson. And then they fixed that glitch in the Constitution, and we wouldn't have this problem ever again. And we can see this kind of a north-south divide, but not fully. Much of Pennsylvania was split, and New York went along with Thomas Jefferson and his party. Now, Jefferson, when he comes in, what does this mean? When we're going to have a new president of a new political party, this is a new test for the nation. Is it going to work out? Is it going to be sort of very derisive and divisive politics, or will they be sort of compromise kind of thing? And Thomas Jefferson recognized this and recognized that he had to be a moderate, and he had to, in some ways, show some reconciliation towards the Federalists. And in his opening speech, he was very good at doing this by reminding the country, as he put it, we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists, we are all Americans. And this is a theme that future presidents will follow on this precedent. After an election, elections can be very ugly. A lot of nasty things can be said. And now you got to work with these people. And so you need to put those sort of politics in that election behind you and focus on areas of common ground. And Jefferson, very good at recognizing this and, not being such a radical change with him coming in. And with Jefferson, he's going to find out that it's not easy to govern. It's not as easy to govern as it is to criticize the government. And, there's a lot of serious problems that he's going to have to deal with. And he doesn't necessarily, get to steer things the way that you want to. As a president, you're often at the mercy of the vicissitudes of events around you, meaning, you don't necessarily control the events control you. And for Jefferson, very much the events of what's going on in Europe will have a lot to do with controlling him. Now, a big question came in with patronage. Patronage is the power of the executive branch to name the officials of the government, and there's a lot of them. Especially at the bottom there, postmasters. There's a lot of people sort of in charge of the post office and the mail system, a major responsibility of the government, especially early on. And so you can give these jobs to your friends as a way of sort of political bribery. But Jefferson recognized that would not be sort of the moral, proper Republican thing to do. And so he looked at all these government officials and said, I'm not going to, wildly just replace them all. I'm going to keep them in. And okay, these are Federalists, but, they're just doing their government job. What he did replace was the cabinet. Adams had not. Adams had kept George Washington's cabinet pretty much in place, but Jefferson recognized, I need to bring my own group of advisors. But the rest of the government he left largely intact. And this would be followed for the next few presidents until Andrew Jackson a little bit later. So let's just look at this whole concept of patronage, has it played out as a political tool. In 1828, when President Andrew Jackson comes in, he says, hey, to the victors go to the spoils, meaning I've won the presidency. I now have the ability, the power to replace all the officials that I want and replace them with, people who had supported me. And in a way, this became a system of bribery that existed within the national government for quite some time of, you support me politically and I'll sort of put in a good word for you into this position. And if we go back, just the custom officials, especially New York City, if you can be the guy in charge of the port, that's a great opportunity to make a lot of money on the side through allowing smuggling to happen or, and taking bribes. And so they could be, very, very lucrative. So you get a lot of sort of, hey, I'll give you a lot of political support and monetary support. In return, I would like to have this very plum government post once you get elected. And that's what Andrew Jackson sort of initiated, this kind of system of bribery, which goes against the whole notion of republicanism, which is, an anti-corruption kind of thing. This finally gets fixed in the 1880s with a Pendleton Act, where it went on the basis of merit and not through appointment into the bureaucracy, which by 1880s had really started to grow. And that's the way it is now. So they went through a period of time where the whole idea of government positions became a legal form of bribery in a way. Now, for Jefferson, the question of just how Jeffersonian was he, and looking at all the Federalist programs that had been put in place, had been very critical of what he's going to keep, what has he got. Some he's more than happy to get rid of. The Alien and Sedition Act, that expired when he came in. He just sort of let it expire. He didn't try to renew it. And with the excise taxes, tax on whiskey, gone. And for Jefferson and his supporters, big celebrations, big woohoo to that one. But for the bank, which he'd been so, anti at the beginning, well, it was doing what it was supposed to do. The bank was working. It was operating in the way that it intended, of providing a stable economic way of growth through lending and providing, a sound financial basis for the nation and for the government. And so he kept that as well. And tariffs were also maintained. They weren't necessarily all that high, and he needed some source of revenue. So, the excise taxes are gone. He needs to keep some way of maintaining some money for the government. And for him, paying off the debts, is going to be a key idea, which the bank was functioning towards doing as well. So it's not a major, massive change that maybe some of his supporters had hoped for. He's a little bit more moderate, looking at what's working and what's is he opposed to. And for in the Supreme Court, we get an important concept known as judicial review being established. Adams, in his last day as president, had nominated a number of judges to the Supreme Court and other judgeships, and it led to a lot of controversy, and it led to a Supreme Court decision. And in this Supreme Court decision, we don't need to know the details. It's Marbury versus Madison, one of the very early ones, and the concept of judicial review is established with the Supreme Court decision, and that's the main idea here. Judicial review meaning that the government has the ability to examine government laws, government statutes, and to make a decision of whether they are constitutional or not, to interpret it. And if they find that it's against the Constitution, to throw it out. And that's, what the Supreme Court does today as its major function, is to review laws and to, generally as they come up through a dispute through the courts, and to make decisions on that, and to become, as it says there, the ultimate authority on the interpretation of the Constitution. So it's the Supreme Court really laying down its role. The concept of judicial review had existed before at the state level. It's just now being brought up at the Supreme Court level. And there's Marbury, what it's all about. So you may wish to look a little bit more at it. It's a bit of a convoluted story. You just need to know that judicial review was established with this case. Jefferson finds himself embroiled, reluctantly with problems for his merchants who were being beset by pirates in the Mediterranean. And we get sort of America's first war, known as the Tripoli War. And this is, Thomas Jefferson, who doesn't want to be spending a lot of money. He's not big on trade, but realizing American merchants need to be protected, investing a little bit more in the Navy, and the reluctant warrior in this case. Here's an American ship being burned down. So he realizes, we need to assert ourselves internationally as well at this time. Haiti went through a revolution, a slave uprising, and Thomas Jefferson, chose not to recognize this new nation. He doesn't want to upset France, and even though it was revolution sort of in the Republican sense, Jefferson refuses to recognize Haiti as a new government. But we get problems for France, and it's going to lead to, for France, leading to deciding to sell off Louisiana to Jefferson and the Americans, which gets to the last of the major concerns with Jefferson before we get to the War of 1812 and the problems with Britain and France, is this offer to purchase Louisiana. It came as a bit of a surprise offer that France was willing to sell it to the Americans, and Jefferson wasn't quite sure what to do. He didn't know if it was constitutional or not for him to purchase it, but it was such a great offer. He's offered to buy all of Louisiana for $15 million in gold. And so he says, okay, well, we'll do it, and then we'll let Congress and the courts make the decision whether or not it's constitutional. And so he purchased it, Louisiana Purchase. You can see a very large purchase there. And Napoleon, he'd gained control of it back from France. And, this is when the United States sent over people to sort of say, would you be willing to sell? Or, if France is there, what does this mean? It's just sort of talk about it. And they're given the offer to buy it. And they're like, ooh. For Napoleon, he doesn't want to get involved in America. He's lost Haiti. He decided to sort of cash in North America and invest it all into his battles in Europe, and he needs the money for his army, so he decides to sell. There it is there. So they buy it. Jefferson, doesn't know if it's constitutional or not, but hey, people love this. Woohoo! Look at what we got. And so questions of Constitution be damned. They just say, hey, we'll take it. Congress makes the decision. We'll definitely grab Louisiana. And, effects of the purchase, major effects, the country's just doubled. And it set a precedent for acquiring more land. This is the first time they've gone beyond what had originally been assigned. This is the United States. And sort of set the precedent for growing outside of what they already are. And, they'll expand in various ways, through purchase, through diplomacy, or through military conquest, all three of them to take the North American continent and then even beyond. And this definitely allowed the United States, to remove a threat on its western borders, and did help into further expansion. And then we're going to get wildly successful and quite famous land exploration. This is 1800s was definitely a time of great land explorations, and Lewis and Clark, but we should not forget their a very important guide, native guide Sacagawea. There's Lewis Meriwether, I believe. And, they sent out little coins of friendship as they went out to meet with the different native groups who are the ones who really occupy Louisiana Purchase. The president on the back. And yes, so there's their expedition that they made all the way to the Pacific coast and back. And, they had their troubles along the way, but it was definitely a learning experience for the United States. They wanted to know what's out there, and they discovered things like the grizzly bear for the first time, and lots of other animals and plants that Americans were quite unaware of that they now have within their territory. All right, and we'll stop there, and with the next lecture, we'll get into how Jefferson dealt with the problems of fighting between Britain and France that he inherited from Washington and Adams, and then into his successor, James Madison, who finally does drive them into a war with Great Britain, the War of 1812, which was in many ways a major turning point for the United States. All right, thank you very much.